Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few seconds here. All right, let's get started.
Amazing.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us. We've been in the industry for 37 years, and we've got Benjamin Von Wong here to do a webinar with us, and we'll learn more about his process over the next hour or so. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit any questions you have. Try not to use the chat because we don't really get to see that very well. We'll try to get to all the questions we can during the session, and at the end, we'll post a link to this to YouTube so everyone can watch it later on. We also have a limited time software offer for anyone who purchases our Pro product. They get access to the Boris FX suite for 3 months. So that's pretty cool. And we also have VizTech here. They're going to be in the chat answering any questions anyone may have. So without any further delay, Ben, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Von Wong. I am an artist, and today I'm going to be, I think, giving you guys a presentation that will last, give or take, an hour, at which point we can dip over into Q&A and go from there. I think presentations are always a little bit more interesting because then you get to see something more exciting on the screen than my face. So hopefully all this is working. I'm going to pull up the chat over here. Nice to have VizTech in the house. I'm actually back in Canada, Montreal, Canada right now. And things are a little bit crazy here in Canada thanks to COVID, but I'm sure we'll get through it together. Anyways, if there's any problems with the screen, do let me know. I think earlier, actually, let me share this one more time and make sure I have sound sharing selected.
Yeah, make sure you have that selected.
I do. Amazing. Yeah, so let me know if there's anything missing, Tom, and I will fix it. All right.
Looks good.
Yeah, my name is Benjamin Von Wong. I'm an artist, an activist, an environmentalist. And for those of you who aren't familiar with my work, it looks something like this. Now, for the work that I create, I always, I think the dominant reaction when people look at what I do is a question. They look at it and they wonder, wait, tell me, what am I looking at? Is it real? Is it fake? Because it kind of looks like a painting. And that feeling is something that I do very, very intentionally, because at the end of the day, the reason for creating work like this is to invite a conversation. I want people to look at this and have questions, because when you have questions, when someone has a question, it becomes a lot easier to tell them why you're doing what you do. So as an example, when someone looks at this and they ask me, wait, tell me a little bit more. What am I looking at? I got to say, well, actually, this is a photograph. This is a photograph of a guy jumping, and what he's jumping in front of is an art installation that we built. And we built this out of wood and LED lights. The reason actually these waves are glowing is because there are LED lights behind them. And we built this inside of a mall all the way in Vietnam with the help of hundreds of volunteers. And we built this with the help of hundreds of volunteers because I don't actually know how to build anything, because I'm a photographer at the end of the day. And I need help by lots of the community in order for the manpower to go through. And then we can reach this why. Like, why did we do this? Well, we wanted to raise awareness for plastic pollution. So we collected 168,000 plastic straws over the course of 9 months with the help of volunteers all around the world and then organized them, sorted them by color, and built them up into a Guinness World Record art installation called Strawpocalypse. Right. So this sort of ability to take people through an adventure gives the work, I believe, anyways, a lot more meaning and purpose and depth to it. For someone who's an activist who wants to inspire action and who wants to get people to change their perspective on the way they see the world, it's really important that we start from a place of conversation. Because if I started with, wait, let me tell you why you need to change your behavior, I'd make a lot of enemies really, really quickly. I think when we think of information, we would hope that if people only knew, they would do better. But studies show that that's not the case. Just because you have the facts doesn't mean it leads to actionable behavioral change. Now, I'm not saying art in and of its own is the only piece of the puzzle, but I do think that it has a role to play. Within art and story and the ability to generate conversations with people, we can sort of close the gap between the heart and the mind. So as an example, we look at a piece like this and we say, oh, you know what? Every 60 seconds, a truckload of plastic falls into the ocean. That's great. But like, what is a truckload of plastic? What does it look like? How does it feel? And so I try to use art to ignite those conversations. And I do them through this means of adventure. For this project, I went to an island on Greece called Corfu, and they have no drinking water there. And within a week, just by setting up in one place and getting covered a couple times by the local news, we were able to collect over 2 truckloads of plastic in just a week because they don't actually have access to drinking water on this island. It's because of the huge rise of tourists. They ran out of water, and so with the help of local schools and kids, we collected a truckload of plastic, 2 truckloads of plastics, and brought them out onto a location in order to highlight this very statistic of how a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean every 60 seconds. And the emotion that I was hoping to get people to feel as they look at these images is how overwhelming a truckload of plastics actually is, and how unrealistic it is to expect single individual actions from single people, like individuals. Like when a company tells a consumer to that they need to recycle, it's good, it helps, but it's not enough alone, right? We need to turn off the plastic tap. That's one of the big conversations that generally happens. And so I also see art as an ability to highlight invisible problems. An example of that might be the clothing that we wear. The clothes we wear is made out of polyester, nylon, spandex, all of these different materials that when you toss into the laundry machine and it gets washed up, it leaches out a bunch of tiny little plastic microfibers, right? So this whole movement right now to recycle yoga pants or like recycled yoga pants out of plastic bottles might not actually be a good thing because it's just prolonging the issue. It's displacing the problem from the present into the future because every single time you wash your clothes, it creates pollution. Now, this is an issue that has been covered fairly extensively in the environmental circles. It's been picked up by a number of scientific reports. But at the end of the day, those who don't care about the issue are never going to read it. So how do you educate others? How do you make sure that those outside of the circle of influence, whichever filter bubble you happen to be a part of, how can you break those filter bubbles? And I think once again, this is where art can play a role. I teamed up with some students from Georgetown University. We thought it would be interesting to try to make some monsters out of clothing, because if we think about it from a metaphorical perspective, this clothing that we're putting into our laundry machine is now coming back to haunt us. And so there's something really fun and interesting about this story, that you can draw a huge number of people into the conversation, right? And it's very obvious, it's very simple. We're now saying, well, the clothing that we put into our laundry is coming back to threaten the next generation, which is like a literal representation of exactly what that thing is. And it's not particularly serious. However, it enables, once again, a new conversation to take place that would never have taken place otherwise. And it's not just about the lessons, I think, that we broadcast out into the world. For me, it's also about taking the opportunity to look around. And anytime I stumble across people who are doing interesting things, I reach out to them and I say, hey, is there any way to work together? I met someone who's now a good friend. Her name's Laura Francois, at a TEDx talk in Penang, and she was doing a presentation around fast fashion. The amount of clothing that we wear uses a tremendous amount of resources, to the point where a single T-shirt uses 400 gallons of water, or about 2,500 liters of water. And after her presentation, I was like, wow, if you ever stumble across a large amount of material or a location that's really interesting, that, like, whether it's a shut down factory or otherwise, that you think my photography could help contribute, I'd love to help tell stories around this issue. And I do this all the time. Like, I meet people all the time. They're in all these different fields and professions, and 99% of the time people don't get back to me. But this one time, Laura reached out to me about 8 months later, and she said, "Hey Ben, guess what? I just found an abandoned warehouse in Cambodia. There's these clothes that have been sitting there for almost a decade now, ever since the 2008 financial crash where the company went bankrupt. And it's filled with clothing. It's filled with clothing scraps that have been left to rot. And if you want to do something with it, we have to do it quick because they're actually going to get rid of all of it." And I was like, "Oh no." So I completely changed my plans, managed to squeeze this in between two conferences, flew myself over, and we just kind of landed there with not much of a plan. So we just started improvising along the way and thinking, like, how can we take this material? How can we tell a story with it? And in my head, it was once again one of those simple metaphors where you can take, if a single t-shirt takes up 2,500 liters of water or 400 gallons, well, then our entire closet is the equivalent of a waterfall. And so let's create that. And so I have all of these different projects. And the interesting thing is, the more you put yourself out there, where you say, I care about an issue, I care about a cause, and I want my work to make a difference in the world, well, you kind of attract those people back to you. I was doing a presentation very similar to this one at South by Southwest a couple years back. And at the end of my presentation, someone from Dell comes up to me and she says, "Hey, Ben, I don't think you've ever done any work with electronic waste before, but would you be interested in doing something similar by using materials to highlight the issue?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know much about electronic waste. Tell me more." And that's where I learned electronic waste is the fastest growing municipal stream in the United States, that only 15% of electronic waste is actually recycled, and how it's this like massive problem because of the amount of toxic chemicals that leaks into the water. And so I get the chance to learn about how my work can make a difference by pure virtue of signaling it to the world, by doing presentations like this, and by talking to people and being open to discovering more things. And so Dell, turns out they've been the largest electronic waste recycler in the world for about 20 years or so. But you can only put a press kit out so many times before it becomes a little bit boring. So how might we find a new and interesting and exciting way to talk about an age-old problem? I think once again that comes down to art, right? And in the process, when I create these things, I try to make them as relatable as possible. So yes, not everyone has access to an electronic waste facility, but maybe the art itself can be something that almost anyone can do. So in this case, I wanted to lay out these laptops in the pattern of a solar array, and we used it with the help of just rope, some chalk, and a yardstick, and some simple math. And when I create these images, I try my best to find visual metaphors that people recognize, because at the end of the day, the delineation between something that is considered to be cool and something that's just considered to be weird is actually very fine. For something to be cool, it needs to be like within the boundaries, right on the edge of normal, but not too weird that people fall off the cliff and don't understand it. Like when you go to a contemporary art museum, you might stare at something, you're like, I don't get it. And I try to make sure that everyone can get it. And so I steal pop culture references. This, for example, on the floor, you might recognize this pattern. Looks very similar to the opening scene of Blade Runner 2049, where there's like a field of solar panels. I think of the visual metaphors that come into play. And so we used uh, um, Ethernet cables, mice, adapters in order to recreate what might look like the inside of a circuit board. The character, the model that we highlighted, we stole inspiration from Tron. And now you take all of these different elements and then you piece them together. Then you get to create something that's totally new, totally exciting, and once again gets the opportunity to engage people in conversation that would never otherwise happen. And so what we wanted to share in this story, in this image, is that past technologies can be used to power future devices. And the story is told not just through the final images, it is told also through the process of how we created this project. And so I just wanted to open up there to explain and set the stage, I suppose, on why I believe that art has power, right? I believe that art has a place in our society, and art has the power to move people forward and start conversations and create relationships and get people to stop and wonder and shift their perspectives. And that to me is like the best usage of art, because why go through all the time, energy, and effort to create something if it's only for someone to like double tap on a screen and then scroll past it, right? Like that just feels like a little bit tragic in some way. So at this stage, I want to take a pause real quick on the work that I'm doing today and rewind back into time on the kind of work that I used to create. Because ultimately, I would like to share. I know that the work that I do today is a little bit unrelatable, and I wanted to highlight the different lessons that I've learned along the way that I think may be very relevant to you guys. So I was actually a hard rock mining engineer, and I picked up a camera sometime in I think I bought my first camera in 2007, and then I just had it as a hobby on the side. And when I first started photography, I was just using it as a means of self-expression. I found out that if I was taking a photo of myself, not particularly interesting, the best way to make me look interesting was through Photoshop. It was the first tool that I used, and I discovered where with no budget whatsoever and just no models, no costumes, nothing, you could transform ordinary things into extraordinary backdrops. And for me, that meant expressing myself because I was just going through a breakup, which is why all these images are a little bit emo. But that's kind of where I started. Was how can I achieve the maximum impact with the minimum effort? And over time, as I got a little bit more confident, I was able to reach out to models. I added on lighting effects by incorporating both Photoshop as well as lighting, and just starting to pay attention to the environment around me and a little bit of costumes and models. I was able to transform ordinary places into something just a little bit more extraordinary, whether that was like an excavator that we found on the side of the road. On the left, in the center, we have a piece of graffiti that I discovered. Actually, we ended up finding the graffiti artist, and we took pieces of newspaper, threw it up into the air, had a flash on the top, shifted the white balance to blue in order to get this more ethereal feeling. And then on the right is just my shed, my tool shed, that with just a little bit of lighting in the background, along with some good hair and makeup in the front, you could transform an entire space. And this idea of just transforming ordinary things into extraordinary things was something that I found really, really compelling. And then I discovered special effects. And that's when things, for me, started feeling like they got really exciting, because this ability to play with materials and tools, it almost felt like every project was a little bit like a magic trick. You would do these things and people would look at it and just wonder, and they'd want to start this train of question, that sort of curiosity that I was mentioning a little bit earlier. Well, I found that to be even more true when you started playing with special effects in the physical world. And along the way, I learned a ton of different things. So on the left, as an example, the models are holding flour in their hands and they're throwing it up into the air. And so we learned that if you want to replace smoke as an effect, you can use flour, but you better make sure it's not your studio because it's impossible to clean. We learned that in the center, the lady is using liquid latex as a material. And if you don't put Vaseline on the eyebrows and the person's like sort of trying to take it off, it's going to rip off all of their eyebrows. So that's another lesson that we learned. And then the final one on the right is light painting, right? Light painting with birthday sparklers. And we learned that even though they're children friendly, you're not supposed to put them too close to skin because they can still burn you. But all of these small little adventures were what kept a lot of conversation going. It was a really great way initially for me to build a social following, generate conversation. But out of all of these projects, there was one project in particular that stood out. And it wasn't because the photo was better than the others. It was because the photo itself had a video recorded to it. And so the photo that I'm referring to is actually the one on the left. This is the first project of mine that someone had actually come to document. The girl that I was dating at the time thought it would be a really good idea to record me. And I was like, why would you want to record me? Why would you want to make a video? I can't imagine why anyone would want to watch this, but it turns out people are really curious. They really want to know how these things happen. And by actually sharing the process of how you do something, it actually opens up the possibilities for anyone to come and participate in the project, because now everyone can be like, oh, maybe I could do that in the future. And so what you do when you share videos, when you share the process behind an image, when you reveal the magic tricks, so to say, you're inviting people to be the hero of their own journey, if only they want to take the time, energy, and effort to figure out how to do things. Because if you're already sharing them, your trials, your tribulations, your lessons, the things that went wrong. So in this project, when we're trying to light this man on fire, It's like a 10-minute video of us not really successfully lighting this guy on fire as much as I really wanted him to be. Um, it still creates a really interesting and exciting conversation. And so at the end of the day, the one lesson that I learned from creating videos of the different photo projects that I was doing was that it's really important to try to position yourself to be the guide rather than the hero. I think too often people try to be the hero. They try to brag a lot about what they do. But the true power lies in when you can unlock other people's potential to become the best version of themselves. This is why you see so many photo educators today are so successful, is because they're giving others the tools so that they can become their best selves. And intrinsically, the person who is the guide actually is higher up on the hierarchy than the hero. So if we take a movie, for example, let's say Star Wars, you have Luke Skywalker. He's actually never ready for any of the trials and tribulations that he has to overcome. He's woefully unprepared. He's never talented enough. He's always making dumb mistakes, and he needs a Yoda or an Obi-Wan to kind of guide him in the right direction because they've already done it. They've already been there. And so the position to aspire to is more that of the guide as opposed to the hero. If you guys want to read a little bit more about this, there's an entire book on it called Story Brand by a guy called Donald Miller. So you can always do a little bit more research on it. So this brings us about to, chronologically anyways, to about 2012, which is when I decided to quit my day job. Now, by this point in time, I'd realized that being a hard rock mining engineer wasn't really where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. I didn't know if I wanted to be an artist. It didn't seem like necessarily an easy life, but I knew what I didn't want to do. And so the best thing to do when you know what you don't want to do is to stop doing it. So I decided to quit my day job and figure out what to do next. And earlier, I think what it was really about for me was just to travel. I just wanted to get out of home. I wanted to do the things that I could never do when I had a day job, and that was just be spontaneous. If you met someone interesting and you could do something, just go there. I ended up doing a tour of Europe. This was shot in Bratislava with some dancers. One of the people I went to high school with was actually in the National Slovak Theater, so he photographed her there. I went to France to work with this pyrotechnician called Andre Das. And the reason I wanted to go see him was because he had actually left a comment on that fire video I shared with you earlier. And this was when we didn't know each other. He left a comment and he said, "Hey, Ben, I just want you to know that your photography is pretty nice, but your firework really sucks." And I was like, "Oh, who is this guy? He really knows what he's talking about." And that's how we met. I just responded to his criticism and asked him if we could work together. And he said, "Let me know when you come to France." And I just came over to France. I did a workshop, and that's when we had the chance to work together. And this ability to just go anywhere in the world and to teach in exchange for that kind of plane ticket, and then to be able to meet people who would then become your collaborators because you had just spent some time together, was a phenomenal way to travel. And so as time went on, I started being able to create this amazing network of people so that I could have models, I could find assistants, I could find gear, I could find basically anything I needed in almost any country, even if I'd never been there before, because I had this supportive community of photographers and artists around that were just interested in participating in these amazing adventures. But I had one problem. See, at the end of the day, even though I was really good at, or I was really decent at creating images and documenting them enough anyways to get attention, I wasn't able to necessarily get hired. Because as it turns out, photographers don't really hire other photographers unless you want to spend your entire career teaching. And I wanted, or I felt like I wanted, these big commercial advertisement campaigns. I just didn't know how I was going to get them. And so that's when I think the wheels started turning, and I was like, I really need to figure out how I can reach outside of my demographic, but I didn't know how. And this, when you don't know how to do something, I think you just keep it in the back of your mind, and you have to keep playing, and you have to keep experimenting. And one of these experiments eventually led me to tying a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali. And this was all the way back in 2013 or something. I was on vacation. My parents really wanted me to go on vacation, and I didn't want to go. But I figured, if I was going to go to Bali, I might as well figure out what there is to do there that I could learn. And it was diving. I had never gone diving before, and so I started looking around. Where do I want to get my dive classes? Where do I want to dive? Oh, look, there's a shipwreck. Oh, if there's a shipwreck, I really need to do a photo shoot. If there's a photo shoot, I need a model. If I need a model, I need a dress. I need a dress. I need a safety crew. Anyways, one thing led to another. And in this week that I happened to be in Bali, which ended up not being a vacation whatsoever, we ended up creating this series of images that went completely viral. I was actually trending on Facebook back when Facebook had trending, got picked up by Bored Panda with, I don't know, 50 or 80,000 upvotes. I don't even know anymore. And it was just like, why are these images going viral? Out of like all the work that I created, okay, I get it. These are cool images. They're pretty, they're interesting, but why these ones? And when I thought about it, it took a little while to think about this, but I think it's because this was the first time that I had photographed something that was able to be described in words, right? I'm able to say that I tied models 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali. Do you want to see it? And it sounds intrinsically interesting. It's something that you can turn around to the person sitting next to you in the bar and say, hey, I tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali. Do you want to see it? Whereas my earlier work, which is saying, hey, I shot a pyrotechnician. Do you want to see it? It's like not quite there. Or I shot a photo of this lady in a big bird costume on a rock. Like it just doesn't have that same compelling nature. And so language matters. The way you use, the way things are described really matters. And this is true also of photography. So even though the art exists in a visual mean, the way it's communicated, the way it spreads, at least the way it spreads today for the most part, through social media, if a journalist is going to write about it, they need to say something about it. And it needs to be a headline that they're going to be opening. Right? So this importance of headline was the next big piece of the puzzle that I constantly reminded myself of. I'm going to give you an example of like how important titles are. I created this series for a company called SmugMug. You guys might know them. They host amazing photography websites. And on the left, we have the CEO, that's Don McCaskill. On the center, we have his wife, Liz. And on the right, he's not at SmugMug anymore, but I think he was their head of marketing, Michael Shostak. and this was a series that we created, or they commissioned me to make. They basically wanted to highlight their employees showing off their guns, like showing off their muscles so that they could print them really big and put them inside of their gym to keep them all inspired. Wonderful initiative, fun story. I ended up launching this under the title, The $40 Trick to Epic Portraiture. It did really well. It got on the photography websites, the f-stoppers, the petapixels, the SLR lounges, like all those sites. But then it kind of stopped there. And it stopped there, like quite obviously, because the title was only targeting photographers. So really, if you didn't care about what the $40 trick for epic portraiture was, which is basically us creating a rain machine out of PVC pipes and garden sprinklers, then you wouldn't talk about it. And so my roommate at the time, who's a genius at marketing, her name's Karen X, she was just like, Ben, we should try to like launch this exact same series of yours one more time. And let's do it in a different way. And I was like, okay, what do you recommend? And she said, let's launch this series on the 1st of January. Okay. And on the 1st of January, why? Because that's when everyone makes their New Year's resolution. So everyone's thinking about workouts and gym. Smart. And then from there, she recommended focusing not on the final result, but on the transformation, right? The transformation of ordinary people into extraordinary athletes, ordinary people, Hollywood budgets. And so we launched it again on the 1st of January, 8 months later, exact same images, just framed differently. And suddenly we were on the front page of all these different health and news blogs like Yahoo News or Yahoo Health and all that stuff. And why? Because because the way you frame things truly matters. The headlines that you use to market your things really matters. And if you can't think about how others should talk about what you do, then the chances that they're going to go through the effort to figure out how to market your stuff for you is really, really, really small. And so this importance of headlines is something that I've really carried around with me everywhere, to the point where now I basically don't do a project if I don't think it has a compelling headline. If I can't see why someone would want to talk about it, then I'm not going to bother to create it in the first place, because it takes so much time, energy, and effort to create these projects for people not to care. Then it's not worth it. And so armed with this news, this weapon, I suppose, of the importance of headlines, my work really slowed down. I stopped doing so many projects, and I started to focus on how I could make every project I created really stick and really stand out. An example of that would be this one, where we shot at the world's largest monastic library. We shot a series, like a real world Beauty and the Beast inside of the world's largest monastic library, right? So it's got like these key phrases that people recognize and know, and there's the word biggest, and it's Disney, and it's got princess, and the photos are beautiful. And so this kind of approach of thinking about headlines just really changed the way I created images. This one was superheroes on the edge of a 40-story skyscraper. And regardless of what you think of the image, regardless of whether or not you like the image, you think it's too processed, whether it's like, wait, where's the harness? Were they actually tied in? Like all those comments and thoughts that get dropped on the interaction on a Facebook photo, as an example, like that's called engagement, right? Like that's the kind of thing that everyone is looking for on all platforms. And so my ability to generate these kind of comments and images and conversations actually started getting me work. The biggest project that I got, the highest paid gig that I got, was for a cell phone company called Huawei in 2015. At this time, they were like the second or third largest cell phone manufacturing company in the world, even though very few people knew about them. Today, they're banned in the US, so things are not going so hot for them. But they had stumbled across my work and invited me to create the most epic photo I possibly could using a smartphone. That basically come out. They were the first company to come out with a light painting feature built into their smartphone. And it was an amazing camera, and they wanted something really cool. And because they had seen the firework that I had done from the failures that I had done, they thought it would be a really interesting match. And as a result of this project, I ended up on the side of these massive billboards. Like this is in London at the Westfield Mall. I was in airports. I was like, the advertisements were playing before movies and cinemas all across Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. And I don't know, I think for a while you kind of go like, yes, this is great, I've made it. And then you wonder, well, what happens next? And I think for me, this was the goal that I had been striving for. I think it's a goal that many creatives have, is how do I get paid to do what I do best? But then once you get there, for me, it was a sort of a feeling of saying like, well, I guess the next thing I do is I get a bigger project with a bigger budget, with a bigger company to sell more product, to get another project with another company to sell some product. And it just felt like a really like, it felt like I was back on that rat race. There's nothing very aspiring or inspirational about that. And if anything, the creative process is sort of stifled too, because you spend all of your time in meetings instead of creating, because now as much as your budgets have increased, the amount of red tape around each concept has also increased. And so the future was looking a little bit bleak. I had to take a little bit of a pause and think, well, if this is not what I want to do more of, these big, crazy advertising campaigns, then what do I want to do? And I started thinking about the projects that I was most proud of, the ones that I liked, that made me feel like I was leading a meaningful human life. And ironically, it wasn't any photo project. It was rather this video that I had made back in 2013 or 2014 for a family whose little girl was dying of a terminal degenerative brain disease. Now, their father reached out to me completely out of the blue, and they're like, hey, you know how to make things go viral. Do you think you can help us tell our story? Because we think that if we were able to get enough people to hear this story of how our little girl, who's about 3 years old now, is going to slowly lose the ability to walk, talk, and speak until she dies in her like teenage years because of this terrible disease called Sanfilippo syndrome, which is essentially a children's Alzheimer's, then we think that we just might be able to raise enough money in time. And I thought, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really a videographer. I've never raised millions of dollars, but this sounds like a cool challenge. So I ended up flying myself over. I stayed on their sofa for 10 days and created this video. And at the end, this video ended up raising $1 million over the course of a month, $2 million over the course of the year. It was the most funded campaign on GoFundMe. The first time a campaign had ever hit $1 million. The first time a campaign had ever hit $2 million. And I was just like, this is what a good use of art is, right? Like art that is used to change the world, art that is used to move the world forward. Like I want to do more of this. How can I integrate this sense of documentary with my fantasy work? Because as you might notice, there's a big style difference between these documentary videos and these photos. And so this was the big challenge. I want to do more good. And so at the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, I decided to take an entire sabbatical year. I decided that I was going to just put my camera down, shift away from photography. I actually tried moving into documentary filmmaking for a little while. That didn't go too well because it was always telling sad stories, and I just felt that it was a little heavy. And I really wanted to find different ways to use art to make impactful stories. And I can't say I had a very clear plan. I didn't really know how. And it was only through, once again, experimentation, playing, that I finally started slowly but surely figuring out how. One of the first impact projects that I did that worked was the idea of my girlfriend, actually. She came up with this idea of using storms as a metaphor for climate change. So we ended up embarking on this crazy little adventure. We found a storm chaser called Kelly DeLay, tagged along with him over the course of 2 weeks with one of our fans who happened to have a used ambulance, so we could put props inside of it and capture a series of images. And so we thought that we could use these storms as these big supercells as a metaphor for what was coming, and these ordinary people in front just ignoring it, like doing ordinary everyday things, like doing their laundry, to create this series called Climate Change Doesn't Care. Climate change doesn't care what's on the news today. Climate change doesn't care what you're wearing today. And it wasn't my best work, right? Like let's face it. Like look at the previous work that I had done. Look at this one, and it was like, okay, it's not exactly as epic. It's kind of cool. There's something interesting about it, but it's not quite there. But what it did for me is it gave me the belief that it was possible, like that it was possible to use fantasy and impact and combine these two things together, right? We could use metaphors very powerfully in order to ignite conversations around things that are often very invisible, right? When we think about impact, oftentimes we think of these sad documentaries, but there's so many other ways to talk about things that matter. And so I started looking out for all sorts of opportunities. Anytime I went somewhere or did anything, I was like, is there an ability for me to tell a story that matters right here? So on this one time when I went to Fiji, I was invited to teach a photography workshop, and I started asking my friends, I'm like, what is there to do around here? And someone said, well, Fiji has some really amazing shark dives. And I thought, ooh, sharks. I've never shot with sharks before, but I know that sharks have, like, they're being attacked. They got a little bit of a problem. And it turns out over 100 million sharks are killed every single year. There are 300 species of sharks, of which only 3 are like remotely dangerous to people. And actually, they're so not dangerous that more people are killed every single year by refrigerators than there are by sharks. Yet we're still scared of them. Now, what better way to get people to realize that sharks aren't dangerous than by tying a model underwater, which I already knew how to do, and waiting for sharks to swim around. And so that's kind of how this project was born. It was born through this simple concept, but I didn't really know how to do it. Once again, I'd actually reached out to a bunch of nonprofits asking if they wanted to like support this project. I wasn't asking them for any money. I just wanted to create this. And it turns out like nonprofits are very risk averse. For-profits are just as risk averse. Nobody wants to do something they've never seen done before, and they don't really want to trust somebody to experiment. And so you have to almost prove to people that you're able to do it before. And so what I ended up doing was I created this project with the help of volunteers. I mean, Amber, who's the model in this project, she's like she's an electrician by day and a free diver by night. She flew herself over to help on this project to model inside of it. The dress designer from Bali, Ali Charisma, sent his dress over with I think 3 days notice or something like that. The safety divers that came to help were actually shark scientists on this island called Barefoot Manta that thought it would be really cool to help us out, right? One of these projects that should have never worked, yet somehow ended up pulling together because it was a new idea and we found the right people. And then once we actually created the entire project, that's when I went back to a nonprofit. I ended up reaching out to shark stewards who hosted a petition and made sure that it was delivered to the Minister of Tourism in Malaysia. And so that was like my way of trying to connect it to impact in some way, shape, or form. Create the images, use it to drive awareness, and then find the person that can actually weaponize it and make it useful. So I know that when we look at these projects, they may feel like really big and really complex and really, and they're not easy. I'm not trying to say that they're easy. However, the secret sauce isn't actually being particularly smart or particularly well-connected, but rather it's the sense of having a big vision and being able to mobilize people to come and help you. I want to share with you guys a video real quick. One, to give you a break from this voice right here, and you can listen to my virtual voice. But two, I think it would just give you guys an idea of what one of these projects actually looks like from start to finish. And go.
How do you get people to talk about something that is ordinary, ugly, and boring? I wasn't too sure, but from experience, I know that the internet loves to see things that are extravagant, unique, and different. So applying that same concept to plastic bottles, having 10,000 of them seemed like a great start at making something ordinary into something extravagant. With more plastic than fish in the sea scheduled for 2050, it made sense to add an ocean component to the project. A sea of plastic was interesting and sad, but it needed something unique and beautiful to truly stand out. What more unique and beautiful to represent the ocean than a mermaid? And so with the help of a waste management center called Tomra and a local artist called Cynthia, we ended up with 10,000 plastic bottles that came in a 50-foot truck, along with a beautifully designed, handmade mermaid tail. This unexpected combination, I felt, had the potential to be something truly different. So with all three components to make things shareable, the extravagant, the unique, and the different, I felt like we had all of the ingredients necessary to create something that could potentially make the boring topic of plastic pollution more shareable. As the shoot deadline creeped forward, dozens of volunteers joined us in our quest, contributing whatever they could, from helping us clean and delabel thousands of bottles, to rigging up my camera to the ceiling with plywood and pulleys, to borrowing a 52-inch TV from Costco. For the mermaid, talented artists came together to transform our beautiful model into a believable mermaid. And before I knew it, all the pressure was on me, waiting to see if the concepts would work or just be flushed down the drain. As the day flew by, volunteers worked tirelessly, pushing bottles around, collecting them, organizing them by color before tossing them right back out onto the floor to create a new set of patterns that some crazy photographer had told them to do. Slowly but surely, an extravagant, unique, and different series appeared, just like I had hoped. But deep in the back of my mind, one nagging thought remained. How much difference could a series like this possibly make in encouraging people to stop using plastic bottles? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I guess I'm about to find out.
So this series ended up generating 37 million views on Facebook. I think it was like the most successful project that I've still done to date in terms of how much visibility it's gotten and how much traction it's generated. And it really happened almost by luck. This happened while I happened to be in Montreal for my sister's wedding, and my mom discovered a mermaid tail designer, and I reached out to her and asked if we could collaborate. And so this is kind of like the style of projects that I've actually gone and launched my career, at least within the conservation space. It was really these small incremental moves from smaller projects to slightly bigger projects until now we're creating projects that have shifted a little bit, because I felt like I was doing these really big, elaborate photo shoots that was taking a lot of time, energy, and effort and resources only to take a picture. And I started wondering, well, what happens if I can create these sets only once and open it up to the rest of the world? Because if at the end of the day, a lot of what makes my images unique and different are the worlds that I build around them, well, what happens if I build the worlds and I let anyone use them? And so on this project here that you see in front of me, this was a series called Plasticophobia that was made out of 18,000 plastic cups in Singapore that we collected in one single day. And these cups ended up, this installation that we built ended up being a set that so many different people could walk in and let their creativity shine so that they could find a way to reach their audience. A sort of open sourcing of photography, which I thought was so interesting, which is what really drew me into the world of art installations. What if more people wanted to talk about things, but just didn't quite know how to make them interesting? What if you could give people the ability to make things interesting, right? And so for a little while, I'd sort of found what I think every single self-help book refers to in some way, shape, or form. It's this intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. It's the sense of ikigai. And, unfortunately, I think what most people don't tell you is that just because you find it doesn't mean you get to hold on to it, because the world is actually constantly changing. And if we take the latest world-changing event, also known as COVID, what use is a superpower of traveling the world, gathering people to create art installations out of trash to then gather more people? I mean, it's like the worst time in the world to be me. And in many ways, I think I kind of entered this little state of crisis, right? Like, what do I do with myself? What kind of work do I create? What kind of value can I bring in times like this? And I think when we look at the word crisis, though, and we break it down into Chinese characters, there's two words that make out the word crisis. On the left, you have the word called danger, and on the right, you have the word opportunity. And with every crisis comes opportunity. It's almost as if just about the time where you're about to fall off the cliff, you start seeing opportunities that you never quite saw. And when I think of my career and I kind of roll back all like basically this entire presentation, and I think back to like when were the moments in my life where I felt like I was in a state of crisis? It turns out there's a lot of them. you know, um, as an example, um, in 2012, when I quit my day job, I was really good or decent at creating photos. They were beautiful. We see a nice rule of thirds. We see good lighting. We have good costumes. We have interesting poses, right? So I was able to take photos, but I wasn't able to find anyone who wanted to pay me for it. That is a little bit of a crisis to be an artist with no revenue stream, right? What do you do? And then you kind of poke at it for long enough until you figure that out, and then you can get some money now. And so now I'm here. I'm getting paid. This was created for a whiskey company. They wanted to highlight creatives that were being true to themselves and just photographing whatever they wanted to photograph. And this time we went into a cenote in Mexico, and we built this set underwater to recreate a cormorant fisherman. And great, I get to be creative and I get paid to be creative. How cool. However, there's no purpose to it, right? This whole impact thing started creeping up on me, and I started to realize, you know what? Just earning money and doing cool stuff is not good enough for me. I'm not satisfied with that. And so that's another moment of crisis, because now I just figured out how to make money and I'm like, no, actually, I don't want to make money that way. It doesn't work for me. And then I'm thinking, okay, I want to get into the impact world. I want to make a difference, and I don't know how. And so I'm just going to try anyways. And I remember this trip that I went on with my friend. His name's Elia Lacardi. He's a fellow photographer, really talented landscape photographer. And we came up with this concept or I came up with this concept. I don't want to give him any of the blame, but I came up with this concept of saying, well, if only people traveled the world more, then there would be less hatred, right? Like we get to see different people thinking in different ways, different cultures. The more you travel, the more tolerant you usually are. And I thought, well, if people just knew that the world was so exciting and it can almost look like a movie set, then maybe this could be an impact project. I didn't think about it too deeply. And then as I was shooting the series, I started noticing, well, you know what? Elia looks kind of like a white Jesus. And this whole series actually ends up looking very, very colonial. And as I was already there and I was doing this project, I was like, oh no, I don't think this project is actually going to work. What do we do? Well, I never ended up launching it, but that's just kind of the nature of trying something new. It's that you don't always get it right. Actually, you often get it wrong many, many times before you get it right. And so that too was a state of crisis. Like I knew I wanted to have an impact and I just couldn't figure out how. I didn't know how I could tie fantasy and impact, let alone earning money, right? And then I started to figure it out. I got invited by Greenpeace to create this project. This is the plastic bottle project that I shared with you earlier, where it's like, cool, I can now get a big nonprofit like Greenpeace. I can do something meaningful. I can get a tiny little bit of money for it, just enough, at least in this one. I just didn't have to pay anything in order to create work that I believe in, that is meaningful. But you know what? We're entering the age of the smartphone, the world in which every single person is now an influencer. The world is getting noisier. The world's getting more saturated. Algorithms control what we see. How am I going to survive if I only create work once in a while when everyone and their auntie is saying that the best time to post is every single day, all the time, being always on? Doesn't really work for me. That's another moment of crisis. And so I started thinking, well, how do I fight against this? And that's when I stumble across art installations. If I create this art installation once, maybe it can travel. And then every single person who encounters it can photograph it themselves, right? Wouldn't that be a good solution? And so I created this project. It's called The World's Tallest Closet. And it was to represent how many clothes a single person will wear over the course of their lifetime. We created this in Egypt. And in my mind, it was going to be simple. I could build this once, we could design the concept, and then it could just travel. And then I realized, you know what? Every single time this installation travels, it is a huge amount of work. It is actually a huge amount of work to do this once, let alone redoing it over and over again. So you're not really solving the problem of making an installation that travels, because now you just have to go through the same amount of trouble every single time over and over again. And so my entire concept of what this business model could be was actually shot down pretty quickly by reality. So another one of those mistakes that I made where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't figure this whole installation thing out. What do I do? How do I do it? And so within the context of COVID and within the context of my life, like, I think you notice that I think as human beings, we're just kind of constantly in a state of crisis. And maybe crisis is like the wrong word to use. So this over here represents my life. The first 5 years of my life are in red. The orange, basically the whole time until I quit my day job. Yellow represents how long I was a full-time photographer. Green represents the time where I decided to do impact. And then teal over here, should be a little bit longer by now, is actually the amount of time that I've spent in COVID. And you start to, like, when you compress your entire life down into this little graphic, you start to realize, well, crises are sort of part of life, and you just kind of encounter them all the time. And maybe the right thing to do is not to get overly stressed out when you encounter a crisis, because ultimately, at the end of the day, maybe the right question to ask is, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? What is this opportunity that lies in front of me in this unexpected time? And for COVID, it's easy to say this, but I think to live through it is definitely a lot harder. But I just want to share maybe a couple of things that I've done during COVID that embody this principle. Now, it's not as epic, it's not necessarily career defining, but there's still experiments, things to try and things to play around with, just to keep growing and just to keep wondering and just to keep experimenting. One of those projects was this one.
This is my mom, and since quarantine, she's been getting creative. Because I'm a photographer and my sister is 8 months pregnant, she asked if we could do a maternity photo shoot, but with fruits and vegetables. What? I know, crazy, here's the story. It all started with my dad eating corn, and mom noticing that corn looked like skyscrapers. So I came up with a master plan, got my sister and her husband to copy some poses from Instagram, and got to work. I selected the best poses so that we could print, cut, and attach their tiny little silhouettes to a little piece of wire, while mom focused on world building. Once our little city was set up, all we had to do was create a sunset using a little orange pouch and a phone light.
A little higher.
Done. Unfortunately for me, mom is now excited, and she's discovered that pomegranates look really interesting from the inside, and my sister wants more photos too. Like for part 2.
So this was an opportunity not only to spend some more time with my family, which I had already moved away to San Francisco for most of my impact career, and I decided to come back because it was the right thing to do. And for this project, I was like, well, if my sister's getting pregnant and we're going to do some maternity photos anyways, why don't we do it a little bit differently? And if we're going to be doing it a little bit differently, why not take the time to experiment with a new platform? The platform that I started experimenting with was TikTok. And turns out that, in the course of creating a couple of videos, I was able to amass over 100,000 followers in less than a week. And it's just crazy that you can take something that is completely new, completely novel, and find the opportunity in it. Now, I haven't done very much with my TikTok account, but now I'm starting to think, well, after this project that I'm working on right now, I might have a lot of time again. Maybe this is something that I can do and revitalize and see if I can incorporate impact into TikTok, right? So within this void, I think, of time, of change, lies some new opportunities that can happen. And the other thing that I've been experimenting with is a podcast. I figured, well, maybe there's a time where you spend a lot of time talking. Like now I'm talking to you guys, I'm giving a presentation, but sometimes there's an opportunity to listen too. What if you just listened to what the world was working on? And so I started this podcast called Impact Everywhere. It explores positive impact in unexpected places. And then I started to think every episode that I was making, I was like, hey, well, I need to make some art for my podcast. So what if I just made these micro installations out of, pieces of paper, these dioramas that I cut out through Illustrator. And we ended up creating a whole bunch of different little pieces of paper art just for fun. And it was an opportunity to learn something new. Now, I didn't keep it up for that long. I think I did it for about 15 episodes before I burned out. And I was like, okay, this is way too much work to do one of these every single week on top of the podcast. But it's a fun experiment once again. And who knows, maybe in 3 years' time, I'm going to do an art installation that's going to use this exact technique that I have mastered as miniature that I can now do even bigger. And so I think maybe the word crisis is one to use a little bit lightly, because especially for someone like me, even though I feel like I'm in a state of crisis, like I've literally moved back home with my parents and I'm like no longer independent and my ego is suffering. But at the same time, crisis is, maybe this is a good story. Crisis is when you lose the only meal you're ever going to eat that you get for free because school got canceled. And now you're ordered to be in lockdown inside of a house that doesn't have electricity or running water. And you have no way of getting around. Like that is a real crisis. For us, or for me, or for others who are in my similar situation where we just don't know what to do with ourselves, those are opportunities and maybe challenges to figure out. And so I think the lesson here that I'm still trying to practice and try to like internalize, like it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to really do it, is that, you know, crisis, I think, is opportunity in disguise. It's an opportunity to play. And although you might not know why your experiments matter today, I do feel like these experiments can matter in the future. I have one last story that I want to share with you before turning it over to Q&A. So if you have any questions, definitely start dropping them into the chat so Tom and the others can, Tom and Mike can actually sort through them and organize them. But this is probably the one final question around like, what is the value of art? I think many times people struggle to think of like why we should fund the arts. Does it really, really matter? Because ultimately, like I would or charities seem to much rather want to, let's say, feed the homeless, give people food, or provide basic services, or maybe do a beach cleanup instead of funding an artist. And I think that, you know, there is merit to that, but art also has a place of importance. And the best way I think of explaining that is through a story. In January of this year, I received this message from someone on Instagram. They said, "Hi, I just want you to know that someone copied your mermaid concept on a beach of plastics, and that they didn't credit me." And it's funny because like as an artist, I think you go like, "Oh no, someone copied me. They stole my concept." There's a little bit of sad, but not really. But as an activist, you're like stoked because you're like, "Oh yes, I am so excited that someone has been inspired by the work that I do so much that they decided to take action." And so I like started looking around and figuring out like, well, what is the story? Well, it turns out this is the beach in a place called Kuta. And every single day during the rainy season, 250 tons of trash just gets washed up on the beach. And it is cleaned by volunteers, but government people too, and all sorts of different cleanup efforts are ongoing. But this is obviously a problem. It doesn't even matter how much you clean up. You're not stopping the flow of trash that's going into the ocean. And so this lady who decided to model as a mermaid on the beach was one of those volunteers out there to help and clean. And so she ended up bringing her mermaid tail that day. Her name is Laura in Waterland on Instagram, and she created this series of images that actually got picked up pretty virally by her local community. And I just think like when I look at this image and I look at my images and I'm like, okay, they're similar. Conceptually, they're kind of similar. They try to represent the same things. Mermaids struggling on a bunch of plastic bottles, except that I had the privilege of doing it inside of this really fancy warehouse with a bunch of water bottles that aren't going to escape anywhere. And these are trash. This is trash that we actually borrowed from a recycling center and then returned it back to the recycling center. So it didn't go anywhere. And there's this like sense of privilege, I guess, that comes with it. And I think when we think of success as an artist, we often think that success looks something like this. It's saying, oh, I got covered on all of these different places and I got a lot of recognition, or I got some awards, or I got some clients and I got some hired. But like, I don't think this is what success truly means when you're an activist. You know, when you're trying to create work that inspires people, the best headlines are actually the headlines that aren't written about you. They're the headlines that are written about other people. I received this Google alert for my name back in February, and I was like, wait, why do I have this alert in my email? I haven't been covered by Vice anytime recently, and it turns out that there's this social entrepreneur by the name of Huang Ningning. She's all the way in Wuhan, China. Now everyone knows where Wuhan is, and she had basically started a company making bags and shirts from recycled plastics. And I was like, okay, cool, but what does it have to do with me? Well, turns out she actually credited me for quitting her day job as one of the inspirations for getting her to quit her day job. And so it's like, wow, that's absolutely wild. Someone I have never heard of, never seen of, in a year where I felt particularly useless. These images that I shot all the way back in 2016 are changing the lives of someone all the way here in 2021. And like, why is that? Like, there's something really exciting about that, right? There's something really fascinating about it. And I think it's because art, at the end of the day, is an infinite resource. And so for all the artists that are listening into this conversation who are wondering like, well, what do I do? Does what I do matter? I'm here to say it absolutely does matter. It matters how you show up in the world. And it matters what you decide to amplify, because you never know who you're going to touch as you get out into the world and you live something that you're really, truly passionate about. I want to share one last video for you guys, maybe just to conclude. because I think it does a really great job, because it's not my words. It does a really good job of showing how small little actions add up over time. And I think we often underestimate the amount of impact that we can have as individuals, because the ripples that are cast inside of the lake when we kind of toss a rock, they evaporate, they disappear. But that doesn't mean that the rock was never thrown, right? So if we just keep throwing rocks our entire life into this lake, at some point those rocks are going to pile up. Those little pebbles of change truly matter. And so yeah, I'm just going to share this video, which is created by a friend of mine, a spoken word poet called Steve Connell, and a collaboration that we did for the Strawpocalypse piece that I opened up this presentation with.
Nature is struggling.
8 million tons of plastic in our oceans.
I've become addicted to plastic.
We all know about the last straw, right? That last little push in the wrong direction. The wait, stop, wait that won't stop. We can take no more. It climbs on top, and suddenly, everything collapses like a wave that rises high, then crashes, and this is where we are right now. I mean, we all know the stats. A truckload of plastics in the ocean every 60 seconds. A straw used for just minutes exists for 450 years. By 2050, there'll be more plastic in the sea than fish. We get it. And I know, the last straw, it seems like such a tiny thing to tip us over, but it's not. Because it's not about that straw. It's about the way they all add up. And that means to take care of all of it, you don't take care of all of it. You focus on something, each of us, one thing, one effort, one repeated action at a time. And when you think about it that way, the last straw is no different from the first, just one part of a process, no better, no worse. After all, the last straw in one direction is the first straw in reverse. Sometimes we have to move inches to go miles, but with each straw not used, we can smile knowing we didn't contribute to a pile that breaks the back of the ocean, but invested in the notion we can bring the ocean back. And your last straw is the first straw towards that, and that is how it always works. One small action becomes a movement in the direction of a solution. Of course, we can eliminate this strawpocalypse. We caused it. So now we either do the right something to fix it or the right nothing to pause it. And that's what the last straw is. Nothing. Just enough nothing, though, to push us in the wrong direction or the right one, because a straw is such a tiny thing until we don't use it. And if each of us refuse it, just watch how quickly all of that nothing adds up.
All right. I guess maybe one last slide to end on that I think would be fun is just what I'm working on right now, in case anyone's interested. I'm basically building a giant plastic tap. So as you might have noticed, plastic is a pretty common theme in my work. It's not the only thing that I care about, but I think as with most things in life, the more you do something, the more successful you become at it, the more people kind of conspire to get you to do the same thing over and over again. And I came up with this idea, and I just thought it was such an important one. The sense that, you know, we don't solve the plastic issue unless we go to the source and actually turn off the tap first. And so I'm building this project out right now here in Montreal. If you want to participate or you want to help out, please let me know. We're looking for access to a container yard and a landfill right now as part of 2 locations for this project that is then going to travel to France. So that's something that's going on right now. And with that being said, I guess I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Tom, I guess we can head over to Q&A or other things like that.
We've got a few questions, and that was a really good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have an engineering background. How has that experience and education affected your work?
I think it's helped me probably just in problem solving. Like I don't get too fazed by problems, and I can see in what order they need to be resolved, what priority they may need to happen in. And I think I have a just generally overall pretty grounded way of knowing whether or not something is possible or plausible in order to kind of pull these collaborations together. Because at the end of the day, like project management and collaboration are so much key pieces of the puzzle of my work that I think that there has to be some amount of this problem solving methodology that has carried over from engineering. But when it comes to actual, like, I don't know, 3D work or calculations of physics and stress and all that, like that is not my expertise. I do not know anything about it. And I just rely on people who are way smarter than me to help me figure all that piece out.
It's really unique that you're able to mix both those worlds together, creative and engineering. Not a lot of people can do that successfully.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely don't think I was a very good engineer though. So it's almost like it was a good thing that I transitioned away from it.
So what equipment and software do you use for the entire project?
Yeah, I mean, so cameras these days, my main camera is a Sony camera. The camera I own is a Sony A7R II. The lens I use 90% of the time is a 16 and 35 f4. I'm pretty excited because Sony just sent me an A7R4 for me to try for this brand new project of mine that I just couldn't justify paying for. I'm really excited about. So Sony is my main camera, but over my career, I've shot with many different brands from like I started off with Pentax and then I shifted over to Nikon and then I moved on to Sony. So cameras are sort of just the tools that you use. I love Sony particularly because it's good at both photo and video. It has super high megapixel counts, really great dynamic range, and just super user friendly. And so that's my choice for camera there. And then on software, I use a combination of Capture One, Lightroom, and Photoshop. Of course, with the Wacom tablets as my, I guess, editing pen of choice, if you will. And I think that's about it.
That's cool. That's a nice setup. Have you done any projects, or do you plan on doing any projects that focus on fast fashion?
Yeah, I've done a couple projects on fast fashion actually. So I created the world's tallest closet. That was specifically around fast fashion. I did another one with the warehouse in Cambodia. I think if you go to blog.vonwong.com, you can find all my kind of projects grouped by project, and you can discover them. Is it likely that I'll do more? We'll see. I mean, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I've been hoping to move a little bit away from is that I feel like a lot of the work that I create right now addresses things from the position of a threat, right? Like I try to highlight how big a problem is. And I think that's good, but I feel like there's so much negativity in the world today. And so while I do try to bring beauty to problems and I try to create that juxtaposition, I wonder if there's a way to start positioning my work more in a way that represents hope and opportunity. What are the most amazing technologies and solutions that are out there? And I think the world just kind of needs more excitement, the same kind of excitement that it maybe had in the 70s or maybe the 80s or the 90s, right after the Cold War and into when we started looking towards space and all these exciting futures that would be possible. And so I think there's like this, it's kind of just a nascent desire in me right now. That's a seed of wondering, like, how can I shift away from just talking about what's wrong with the world and start talking about, like, look at all this exciting stuff that we can do. Because I think while we think of behavior change, threats are a really good way to do it. It comes with a lot of like emotional burden. It's just really frustrating. It's like a miserable place to be, and it's so much more exciting to be on one, which is kind of focused on the solution space. And so that's something that I'm wrangling with right now. Another one of those moments or crises or problems that I don't quite have a solution for just yet.
Cool. When you're shooting, do you shoot mostly in camera, or do you have do a lot of editing and post processing and compositing?
Yeah, so I think there are like 3 different phases to every production. There's pre-production and shooting and post-production. I tend to put a disproportional amount of work in the pre-production side of things. So right now, for example, for this giant plastic tap project, we're building the tap, but the tap is actually built out of recycled materials. And then we're collecting trash, and we're collecting as much trash as possible with the help of the community so we can tie it together and put it on the stand. And I'm trying to find these 5 locations, a landfill, a park, a container yard, a recycling facility. And so it's like, could we have just done this in a miniature and gotten a similar result? Or maybe we could have just done this all in 3D. Why do you want to go through all this trouble of doing this in person and creating like taking all this time and energy and effort to like get permissions to shoot in different places? And I just think for me, pre-production is where a lot of the fun happens, the unexpectedness. Like I don't know what's going to happen. Like I might have to pivot because I'm not able to find a location that I want, and maybe something even cooler will come out of it. As an example, I was recently trying to get access to a container yard, and the company was kind of like, well, we don't have a container yard, but we have a warehouse that you might be able to use. And that would have been wonderful, because then I would have had a fulfillment warehouse that I wouldn't have thought about. Not that it's going to go through because they came up with other problems, but it's still an example of new ideas that can emerge as a result of being in that physical and collaborative space that I find really interesting. In the actual photo shoot itself, I mean, in my case, for example, like every photo shoot is going to bring out a crew of like 15 to 20 people with all the different COVID limitations that are in place. And so we only have really one chance to do the best shot possible. And so at that point, you pre-prepare everything to align yourself for as much success as possible. You hopefully bring all the lighting that you need. You have the cameras, you have your models, you have your props, you have all that set up, and you try to get it right in camera. And then the post-production is sort of where whatever you were unable to do in those two other categories, like no matter how much prep you did, you wouldn't have been able to fix it. That's, post-production for me is where I go in and I fix all of my mistakes. And I don't really love spending hours alone in front of a computer, just kind of wondering if an image is finished or not. I think that's kind of like depressing to be just locked alone in your room all the time. So the pandemic obviously hasn't been very good for me. But post-production for me is more by necessity. It's a combination of necessity, but you also want it to like look interesting. And so I think I do have a tendency to up the clarity in my images a little bit, increase the contrast. I'll take a layer of curves in and I'll kind of like paint a little bit of contrast in just to make it look a little bit more painterly. And that's just like a personal stylistic choice. I just like it when the images just almost look like a painting, but then if you look closely, you see it's not really one. And I don't know, that little nibble there is what I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's a nice touch. What was your most dangerous or complicated shoot?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer because not all projects are made equal. Like, is it more dangerous to hang from a 40-story skyscraper while, shooting a guy who's got a bicycle horizontally, like parallel to the ground? Or is it more dangerous to be underwater 30 meters with sharks swimming around? Or is it more complicated to need to, assemble 100,000 plastic straws? Like every project is just really different in its case. And I think that there's also probably something to note is that there's a very big difference between like what looks to be dangerous and what is actually dangerous. Like on these sets, like they're always really safe. When I shoot with fire, you're working with experts, people who have a background in pyrotechnicians as pyrotechnicians, and behind them is an entire safety crew that you never see because that's not cool. It's just not part of the story. Similarly with the sharks, you have the sharks, but you have shark scientists. The sharks that we're shooting with are actually black-tipped reef sharks, which are like poodles of the sea. So there's no real danger there. And similarly, there's like 3 safety divers in case anything goes wrong. So there's always like another source of oxygen. And so there's a lot of eyes on the project. And so, every project that you do, what may look dangerous is not actually danger. There's a difference. I think there's a really amazing TED Talk on this by Chris Hadfield. There's a really big difference between fear and danger. And so what you might feel when you look at this project and you go like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's happening. That fear is not actually equivalent to the amount of danger that the people are in. But I think that, that little bit of vertigo that people may feel or something along those lines, that excitement, I think is something that I like to leverage because it creates a deeper relationship with the viewer.
Cool. I've got one from Zoom here. They want to know how you overcame your fear while making the shift from a traditional career to a creative career.
I have to say that part wasn't very scary. I was so sure of what I didn't want to do that there was nothing to look back for. It is only forward, and I had nothing to lose, right? Like the only thing I had to lose, like my plan was to go back to school. I'd actually applied for I'd done the exam for my GMAT. I was supposed to go back and get an MBA, and the photography thing was just supposed to be a fun little kind of sabbatical, if you will. And it just so happened that it worked and that I never really had to look back. So I don't think the fear comes there. The fear is actually more relevant today than it was in the past because now I have something to lose. For example, during COVID, the questions you kind of ask yourself are like, well, I have a name, I have a reputation for doing certain kinds of things. How do I pivot into something without losing all of this either reputation or clout or style that I have? How do you continue playing and experimenting when the world just wants to see you at your best, at your highlight reels? How do you continue innovating in a field and learning and playing when people just want you to stay and do one thing? And so the fear today is one of, I think, relevance, right? How do you ensure that what you do isn't just a fad and continues to be relevant in a world that is changing faster than ever and that is becoming increasingly hard to keep up? And so I play these days, the game that I try to play is a position game. Like, how are you going to position yourself to be in a situation where you can take advantage of the changes that are happening? And hopefully, like, I think it's kind of like surfing, right? Like, it doesn't, you can be the best surfer in the world. If you're not positioned in the right place, you can't catch the wave. And so I kind of think of it in that sense these days. And I think this game is a lot harder to play now because I have a lot more to lose. I'm also getting older. Whereas quitting my day job, at 25, it's just like, it didn't matter. Like when I moved to San Francisco, I just moved with like two suitcases and two carry-on, two dragging suitcases and two backpacks. And I was just like, all right, I'm just going to move to San Francisco. My visa isn't approved yet, but I'm sure it'll come through. We'll just figure it out. Oh, look, a good deal in a place. I'm just going to start renting there. That's literally what I did. So yeah, I think things have gotten harder as I've gotten older, and the more established I am, the more risky everything feels.
That makes sense. Totally.
Yeah.
On your creative journey, who have you learned the most from?
Who have I learned the most from? I don't know. I mean, I think I learned from a lot of people in different moments in my life. Like my friend Karen X that I had mentioned. I've learned a ton from her in terms of specifically marketing and how to make things go viral. A lot of the marketing strategies I use were a byproduct of what she does. And these days she, it's funny because she didn't used to be an influencer, and today she's an influencer. She goes viral all the time on like Instagram Reels and TikTok. Karen X Cheng, she did a couple series. I think you guys might love to feature her. She created a series around low budget filmmaker and using just a 360 camera to do all these really fancy effects.
Oh, that's
I don't know. Like I think there's kind of like subtle influences. For example, my girlfriend's always been an environmentalist, and I don't think that I would have probably fallen into this whole world of environmentalism if she hadn't been an influence in my life. And so I don't know. I think there are a lot of like invisible and visible influences that kind of play a role. But yeah, nothing particularly specific that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's a bunch of people that haven't had an impact then. That's pretty
cool.
Cool.
But impact, I think this is the thing. This is the funny thing about impact is that when we think of impact, we often look at that moment when water turns into ice. And so that's the only inflection point that gets any form of credit. But oftentimes that transition takes place over a far longer period of time. There are so many different causes for it. And so if someone, let's say they're starting at negative 30 degrees, any movement in the direction that is going to be beneficial to them is considered, positive. And so I think part of wanting to do the right thing has to come with a certain amount of faith that you may not ever be rewarded for the good you're putting out in the world. And you just have to know that it's happening, even though you can't see it.
That's very true. So, and that's how you're so successful in getting so many people involved in these projects, because it's for a good cause then, right?
I mean, yes and no. So in the past, people loved, like I had no problems finding photographers to come help out on my kind of fantasy shoots, because everyone just wanted to like see how it was done. And see what these big sets look like with volunteers and makeup and hair and everything. And it just happened that most of those volunteers were men. And these days that I'm doing environmental projects for a good cause, most of my volunteers are female. All the photographers have suddenly disappeared. Not all of them, but the ratio has skewed. I think I do feel that increasingly these days, and I don't know if it's my age or my demographic, but there is this presiding feeling that more people are looking for more purpose and meaning and impact in the world. And so I think it's something worth getting involved in and giving to. I do think there are benefits for it. But I wouldn't say that it's impossible to find people if you don't have impact in it. You just have to, you have to get away from the modality where people think that in order to do something, I need to have money. Because money is really an interstitial. Like people, you have to pay money. You have to do something. You have to do work to earn money to buy the things that you want to do. But if you can do the things that you want to do without having to go through the intermediary of money, that's wonderful too. And so rather than think of like, oh, I need people to help me, think about how you can offer people an experience that they can't get anywhere else, an experience that money can't buy. And I think that's what I offer in some ways. Like, it's not so much that people want to come and clean trash all day long. It's that people want to come and be a part of a bigger thing. They want to be part of a bigger story. They want to see, they want to be one piece of something really big, and to see how it all breaks down. Maybe they just want to get a sense. Oh, look, something really cool is happening in my backyard. I want to be a part of it. I want to see how it's done. Can I be useful? Maybe I can make some new friends, right? Like, there's so many layers to this, and we boil it down to money as the only motivator. But I think that's just the wrong way to look at it.
Yeah, that's very true. We're gonna do one last question.
Cool.
What new wake up call will you tackle? We prefer penguins.
What do you mean? What new wake up call?
Yeah. What's your next big project that's going to be focused on environmental responsibility?
A call to action. I mean, I don't know if you guys have had the chance to watch the movie Seaspiracy. It was like #1 on Netflix for a while back. It's a documentary series on the problems that the fishing industry holds. I think the documentary has its flaws. It's a little bit over dramatic, but it does a very good job, I think, of highlighting the very simple solution is that the fishing industry is deeply flawed, and that we're killing the oceans pretty severely. And I've been noodling a concept that involves the usage of used fishing nets to highlight an issue, though. That's on the installation front, but like the other half of me is trying to get away once again from just doing installation things, because they take so bloody long. I mean, like the amount of time it takes to collect this material and find people and find the funding sources and then have it displayed in the places, like it's so friction heavy that part of me wishes that I could just go back to doing like the smaller, funner projects. So the smaller, funner projects that I'm also going to be doing is looking for like local heroes, local social entrepreneurs that are doing good work, and highlighting them and celebrating them. So that's kind of smaller projects that I'm doing over here in Montreal. So if anyone's doing good work and needs a photographer, let me know. I'm always looking for new ways to give and contribute.
Have you spent any time working with anyone in the farming industry, like local farmers, focusing?
No,
on
I have not. It is not. I am very interested in the world of regenerative agriculture, though. So
yeah, definitely look into that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's it for time. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
No, I mean, if you guys have any ideas, feel free to hit me up. There's a form. You can go to vonwong.info. There's a form you can fill out, and it just gets sent straight to my email, and then it kind of logs it into an Excel spreadsheet, just in case you ever want to participate in something. And otherwise, if you're in Montreal and you want to participate in the Giant Plastic Tap project, you can go to giantplastictap.com. Cool. If you're interested in hearing the kind of discussions that I have, the kinds of people that I'm meeting, you can go to the Impact Everywhere podcast. I think that, so many people get credit for being thought leaders, and all they do is spend time talking and repeating themselves all the time. I find like the true knowledge is when you let other people talk and you just listen and learn. And that's what the podcast is about. It's about just exploring how other people are having impact in all these different ways that have nothing to do with art or creativity. And so I think there's something really interesting there. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to hit me up anywhere. I'm always happy to answer them.
Very cool. Yeah, when I upload this to YouTube, I'll make sure to add all those links so people can access it.
Amazing.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was really cool. And
thank you.
Hope to work with you in the future.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.